Hello, everyone. I am Christy Oliver, the Professional Development Manager at Davis Publications. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Today, we are thrilled to have Davis author and Art21 Senior Education Advisor Joe Fusaro with us to talk about using big questions and contemporary art to foster meaningful connections. Before we get to that, we have a few quick housekeeping items. We would really love for you to ask questions throughout our time together. The best way to do that is to type your questions into the chat box or use the Q&A button. Both can be found at the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring these throughout the session and we'll get to as many questions as we can during our time together. We'll also be pulling a few names from those who contribute in the chat box to win some great Art21 resources. So please be sure to participate in the chat box when prompted for a chance to win. Also, just a reminder that we are recording this session, and after we finish today, a link to the video will be emailed to you and will be available for viewing at davisart.com/free resources for anyone who might like to watch. Next slide. Joe Fusaro is the Senior Education Advisor for Art21, Department Chair for Visual Arts in the Nyack Public Schools in New York, and a member of the adjunct faculty for New York University's Department of Art and Art Professions. He has spent 30 years teaching in the classroom, as well as working in the studio as a practicing artist, and for the past 20 years has facilitated professional development workshops around the country that focus on teaching with contemporary art. He recently collaborated with Dr. Emily Jean Hood on the 4th edition of the Visual Experience, published by Davis. And now it is my pleasure to pass it over to Joe Fusaro.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Zoom TV. And it's good to see, it's good to be here with all of you. I realize that some folks were waiting for a little while to get started, so I appreciate your patience, and thank you for that intro. I also want to acknowledge the fact that, you know, many of you have probably already spent the day at school, perhaps doing a lot of time on Zoom. So I want to especially thank anybody that's made an extra effort to spend more time on the screen today with us to do this. Our time together this afternoon, really want to take some time to talk with everyone about utilizing big questions in your classes and reframing a little bit of what we do with our students. This is all about reframing and not replacing what you teach. We all do some good stuff in our classroom that we want to build on. And this is really about building on that and reframing some of the things that we do as good questions that emphasize what students learn along the way to the project that they make, in addition to the kinds of great things that they create. That's what this is really all about. And if we can, by the end of the workshop, begin to think about reframing some of the stuff that we teach, topics or themes, as meaningful questions, we're heading in the right direction. In the later part of the session, I would also like to use some of the questions that we're talking about to influence some active viewing of one of our films that we've produced at Art21, and also take you through just modeling a little bit of active viewing for your use in the classroom if you're not already doing this with your kids. Of course, we hope that you'll teach with Art21 films, so we'll take you through a short film featuring one artist that I'm really excited to share with you today. And hopefully by the end, you'll have some questions so that you have ideas for developing new content, using our resources, using Davis resources, and of course, the stuff that you're learning today. So here we go. We can go to the next slide, I suppose. So my colleagues here at Davis thought I should start with, what the heck is a big question? And yeah, let's talk about what a big question is. It's simply put, is open versus closed. You know, if we're looking for students to give us one specific answer, usually a good example of a closed question. Open questions have lots of answers, lots of possibilities, and lots of possibilities for different kinds of perspectives in the classrooms that we teach in. An open big question can be used as a reference point when we're in a unit of study. That unit of study could take place over a couple of days, or maybe it's taken place over a couple of weeks, but it's something that we can return to and use so that the more students answer the question in different ways, the more they're learning about what they're learning along the way. Okay, is maybe one way to put it. And then another thing is big question can certainly draw on personal experience to teach a concept or an idea, or for students to teach one another about their personal experience in relation to that kind of question. So an example we have here is really focused on what's the relationship between portraiture and storytelling. We're going to look at Zanele Muholi in a little while later in the session, and she does some beautiful photography featuring herself in this particular photo, as well as others that she works with. Okay. Some examples of big questions, and I tried to pull some examples from both Art 21's educator guides, which you can find at art21.org, and download any of our educator guides as PDFs, free PDFs that you can utilize for your teaching. Couple of examples: what are costumes good for? How might a costume affect the person wearing it? How are works of art enhanced or affected by gallery spaces and other contexts where they're shown? And how can art include previously excluded audiences? Hopefully these are some examples of what we mean when we're thinking broadly about what a big question can be and how we might be able to use it to drive a unit of study, to drive a series of lessons, and both the educator guides and visual experience include lots of this stuff for you to reference in your teaching. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So I'd love to hear from you, and we would love to kind of get some, participation in a webinar like this involves typing into the chat window. So I apologize that I can't see your faces and actually talk with you, but for all intents and purposes, we'd love for you to think about big questions right now that already play a role in your own teaching. And if you're able to share one or two, and also some big questions you're already engaging with as an educator, how do these questions play a role in your teaching? And just, give us some feedback to start. Where are you in terms of folks on the call here? Where are you in terms of using questions like this in your own teaching? So take a few moments to type some answers. Christy and Tony are watching the chat for me because I can only talk with my hands and sort of run this at the same time without paying full attention to the chat. And we'll try to respond to a few things you say right off the bat here.
It looks like Amanda is saying that one question she uses is, what are the reasons that you will create your art?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, what kinds of reasons inspire the work that we want to create? What's the backstory?
And Tammy is saying that they are helpful to for her to focus her instruction.
Totally. Tammy is also pointing out the fact that, it gives us a hook throughout a series of lessons, for example, to keep returning to and to remind everybody, this is what we want you to learn on your way to doing, for example, a project or a particular art making assignment. I think something to emphasize in our session today is really that we want students to pay just as much attention to the kinds of things that they learn throughout a unit about the process of not just art making, but also engaging with art and engaging with questions, because that's what contemporary artists do, and they engage with ideas. And if this becomes a big part of what happens along the way, then not only do we get some good art projects and some good work from our students physically, but we also get some good participation in various ways. That's not just about what they make.
So it also looks like people are using both big ideas and essential questions and big questions in their curriculum. And Martha says, big questions can help us give students the power to make lessons more meaningful and personal because we can amplify their voices.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, if we are engaging with we're engaging with a really meaningful question that is speaking to our kids, then it's much better over the course of a week or two, or however this is, long the unit might go on. It's much better than them coming in every day and saying, when are we going to be finished with the Andy Warhol project?
Yeah, I think so. And it's we have a couple of folks here. It looks like both Laura and Katie are reflecting on the fact that their students are in somewhat of isolation right now, and it's helping them connect their learning with what they're experiencing. And by doing so, letting them investigate the question and then decide what they can do and where they will go with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, drawing on students' experience through this pandemic and really thinking about the kinds of questions you want to engage with while students are home, they're learning remote, they're perhaps in a place that's, not wonderful for them for a variety of reasons, and to tap some of what they're experiencing and really engage in some questions that not only examine that, but also um, examine some bigger ideas that they have about perhaps what's going to happen after this. What are the kinds of things they're looking forward to? What are the kinds of things that they look forward to working on when they're in a different space to even engage with other people or make some other kinds of work? Good. This is a great group.
Mm-hmm. And I also put the link to the Art 21 educator guides into the chat box if anyone wants to save that link for later. And we'll also send it out with the recording.
Sounds good. So let's talk for just a second about how we can take some topics or themes that we might be working with and flip them so that they become bigger questions that students can return to. See a great example of one of Jordan Castile's paintings, Art 21 featured artist, as well as an artist that's featured in the visual experience. All of us, and I speak from experience, folks, all of us have done something called the portrait project along the way. Okay. And I taught the portrait project just like lots of folks have taught the portrait project for a long time. But when I began teaching more with questions and thinking about ideas, changing something like the portrait project to how are portraits a vehicle for storytelling takes it to another level for kids because they think more, I should say beyond representation, sometimes realistic representation, and they think more about the kinds of stories that they can tell through photographs, portraiture relating to photographs, paintings, drawing, whatever they happen to be doing around this idea of a portrait. I guess one thing that I guess I'm asking folks to think about is to make what you do, especially the stuff you do well, bigger and better in terms of the breadth of what kids are going to think about with us. And if we have students, and Lord knows we have students in our classes that have stories to tell, and if they can tell stories through portraiture, for example, then it becomes more than just simply referring to the portrait project and focusing a lot on the physical representation of whoever is in the picture. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not certainly I'm not an advocate for throwing away a lot of traditional stuff that teaches kids meaningful things, like how to represent something realistically. But if it can go a step further than that, and we can also tell stories, and we can also build on that with a good question, such as this, maybe, then we're doing better work, and you'll see a difference in your kids' work. And I have some student samples to show you later, so I'm gonna, try to my best to illustrate that. Okay. And here's another example, just two examples that I thought about because I've experienced these things myself. The monochromatic painting project, where we get students to really work with color. okay, can still take place in our classrooms, but it can become something different if it's about how does color affect the way we experience a subject or an image. You know, we can give kids restrictions around monochromatic color, but ask them a bigger question along the way so that they can have different kinds of discussions, participate in different kinds of activities that lead to that painting or that illustration, or whatever it is that we might be asking them to do. So again, reinforcing, I think what I just said in the last slide is really about, you know, trying to think bigger, get a little bit more out of the good things that we're doing with our kids. So here are some student work samples. The three here are samples, fairly recent samples over the last couple of school years that come from what originally was the portrait project. But what we zoomed in on in these samples is what can you say through a portrait? Okay, and what does the portrait say about the person pictured? Okay, what can you communicate through it, you know, beyond it looking like the person? The two examples on the right, I can attest, you know, certainly look like the people that painted those portraits. Those students, you know, that's a pretty good representation of both students on the right there. The student on the left did not decide to focus on the face, but really decided more to focus on the story and to focus on text filling up the face, and something that was very personal to her. But we went beyond the portrait project and these student samples, and we really got a chance to get into, you know, what it is that you can communicate and what kinds of things can be said in addition to, you know, a portrait looking a certain way.
And Joe, do you find when you switch your thinking this way and start using big questions with your students, do you find that the outcomes are more divergent than before, or was there a big shift there for you?
Well, I mean, you know, I think most of us will acknowledge that if we set kids up with good examples and with some, you know, with a variety of possibilities to start, you know, and we set the expectation that, you know, we're really looking for diverse examples and responses to a visual problem, we're going to get it if we keep reinforcing that in our classrooms. So I try my best not to, for example, teach with one artist at a time. I'm not looking for students to try to emulate, or necessarily in most projects, I'm not trying to get them to mimic an artist's style or even my style if I share some of my work. But what I am interested in is getting them to think about possibilities, and what kinds of things that they can do well that might be inspired by other artists that that we're working with in the class. For example, today, literally today, before I got here, before all of you came to this webinar, this morning, we were looking at one of our artists, Aki Sasimoto, and really we were zooming in on Aki's work, although she's a performance artist and we're doing some drawing in class because we're teaching remote. But we were looking at Aki because she takes risks. She takes risks. She puts herself in places where she is bound to learn something, and that in turn affects her work. So I think that this is, you know, this is all to say yes. There's a very long answer to get to yes. I think you'll get more diverse work, and you'll get more diverse work even on an elementary level. My elementary teachers that are in our district and that I work with, you know, all the time are seeing more variety in the responses they're getting from their kids using good questions to drive their lessons versus the kids feeling like they have to follow a series of steps to get to something that looks a certain way. Now, again, the little guys need to learn certain steps. Let's face it, the little ones need steps. They need to make that turkey at some point. That's not the point, okay? But as we move through elementary school, if kids are able to take the parameters of an assignment and really put their own spin or their own story into the work, you'll start seeing bulletin boards and displays and shows and things like that look more diverse in the approaches from the kids, because the expectation is not that it should all look the same, and every flower or every landscape or every portrait should look the same. Sorry, I'm on a little bit of a soapbox here. I told you this was going to happen.
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
You want to tell us about the two examples we're seeing here?
That's a heck of a long answer to your question, Christy. So
it was an excellent answer. Thank you, Joe.
Student sample on the left, we were working a long time. I've always been interested, and I think my students have been interested in a variety of ways of like how do artists work with memory? In the example on the left there, this was a theme that we worked with for a long time. Art 21 actually has an entire episode that's focused on the theme of memory. But then we began thinking about how do different artists go about picturing memory, and how do some artists even use this idea of layering, this principle of layering to get, or I should say maybe evoke a memory. So one of my students created this layer of negatives and produced this black and white photo of her family, but really from different times in her own history. And the one on the right is really focusing on, how to picture, how do we picture and how do we portray this idea of protection. And these are just two photo samples that I wanted to share with everyone. Oh, and I realize we have another one here. One on the left. One on the left is surprisingly simple. We, just again, like many of us in our careers, maybe we, have done it recently, the line project, but the line project over time, even with some sculptors that I worked with not that long ago, what can a line become is much more interesting than the line project. So Matthew, who made those bowls on the left there, simply used rope and hot glue to make these forms. And that was his response to what can a line become. He made a large series of these things in all kinds of sizes. He would put them together in different configurations and had some sculpture shows with this work. So I think that, the line project versus what can a line become, especially for sculptors, can be an interesting way to think about flipping a project title or an idea like that to a bigger question. And the example on the right by a student I had a few years ago, Mia, she, she was visually answering the question, how can an artist picture music? We have all tried in different ways, I think, whether it's ourselves or we've done it in the classroom with kids, to integrate music and see some kind of relationship with students when it comes to music and art together, a performing art and a visual art together. And this is just a beautiful response to that particular question.
But I think, Joe, in looking at these examples too, I think it's really great that there's such a variety of ways that students can engage with whatever the question is. So if they want to explore something or take a risk, it's much, I feel like it almost gives them permission to go and explore a little bit more. So they're not necessarily trying to come up with a product right away. It seems to me like it's more about thinking it through and trying things out.
Yeah, I mean, and Christy, you're reminding me about just, really asking folks to think about the front end of the stuff that we do when we're working with our students. And what I mean by that is, what leads to, the kind of, good work that they're going to make. What kinds of experiences are we giving them going into that versus being, almost anxious about, let's just get to making work. I mean, I wish I could do a hand raising thing right now. Like, raise your hand if you have been there where you think, I feel this pressure. I want to have a good discussion with my kids and I really want to do some of this stuff, but there's this pressure to let's just get to the fun stuff and make work. Well, you know, I've gotten to a point in my career, and I know lots of you have also, where, you know, we get the culture that we set up. And if kids come in all the time and all they do is make, and there's not a lot of discussion, there's not a lot of thinking, and it's really more about following instructions, then that's what you're going to get. But if it becomes a habit and it becomes part of the culture of our class, that when we work together, that's our pup downstairs. See, even though he wasn't no, he's ready to participate. When we make you know, viewing films, for example, having discussions, thinking through things, brainstorming, and coming up with lots of different possible solutions, that becomes part of the culture of the class. Then, you know, you don't get a lot of that. Let's just get to the fun stuff, because kids are ready. That's part of the rhythm of the class. And believe me, I've been there. I have kicked myself at the end of school years because I've said, you know, man, we didn't really get a chance to do some of that digging a little deeper. That, so, you know, over time, it's getting better.
Yeah, and I know, like, even with having discussions, I remember a former high school art teacher here, when I tried to start doing more or longer or more engaging art analysis with my students, it really took a little bit. And I think I'm so glad that when I had sort of made the decision to make it a priority in my own classroom, that I stuck with it and started right at the beginning of the school year with that, because it, as you said, it really did set up that expectation. And also it just made the works, their own studio work, so much stronger because they were engaging with it in a different and new way. But I think sometimes people can get a little bit afraid if like the first discussion you have is not going so well, or the kids are having a hard time, you know, well, I don't know what to say, you know, kind of thing. So I'm really glad that we're going to get to some of these prompts, and that we'll look at some of the questions that you have in the educator guide. I think are so helpful for people who are used to doing it, but also who are starting out.
Yeah, and I hope that folks understand that the resources that Art 21 puts out are resources to enhance your teaching. It's not stuff to replace necessarily what you do well, but it's to help you do the things you do well even better, or maybe give you some ideas for doing things much differently, because you need that shot in the arm. And I do, you know, I can't, I won't lie here, it's not easy to set up that culture and set up that rhythm in your class. In the beginning, you know, there might not be, you know, perfection, and students might want to, you know, just get to the fun stuff because that's not what they're used to seeing in an art class. But I do, and I don't guarantee much, but I guarantee this. I do guarantee that if it does become the culture of your class, or part of the culture of your class, you'll see the artwork change and become more meaningful to the students creating it. And a litmus test for this is when students take work home at the end of the year and they don't leave it in the building. You know, students leave stuff in the building often. It's been my experience that, you know, stuff that they're not as invested in. But when they're invested in this stuff and there's a different kind of relationship with the things they make, then you see I just essentially a lot of the quality of the work go up. Tony's back. I feel like I'm on a game show.
Yeah, yes. You know, again, I apologize. We are having some technical issues today, but
But we roll with it anyway.
we roll with it, just like we do in education.
You know, these people are teaching in a pandemic. They know exactly what's going on. So
yeah. And I think, like, as we've been mentioning previously, all of these things I think are even like more heightened right now, because we are dealing with so many different things. We're dealing with our students in, you know, having to shelter in place, or we're dealing with all of the issues that are happening in the world, the social and political climate, all of those things. So I think sometimes it can be really overwhelming for students. And so using these questions as a way to like provide an opportunity for students to talk about things that are meaningful for them or that they're trying to figure out, all of those things are really great to explore like in and through art, but the big questions can really kind of help us get there, I think.
Mhm.
Great.
Maybe we'll just start with the before viewing question just to get folks participating in the chat window.
We can
Okay,
do
so
that.
what I can tell everybody at this point is that one thing that R21 advocates in our work with teachers is if you're going to use R21 films in your classes, if you want to teach with artists featured in the series, then it's really important to get students and yourself engaged with the film and view it actively and not active viewing is different from passive watching. Passive watching is when a teacher puts a film on in the classroom and they say, we're going to watch this for a few minutes and we're going to discuss it afterwards. Well, if that's not the, if it's not the most compelling thing the kids have ever seen, then some students will pay attention. Some students will look at their phone. Some students will look out the window and daydream, and all kinds of things will go on. But on the other hand, through our work over the years, we've found that if students have a good discussion before a film, even if it's just a minute or two long, it doesn't have to be 20 minutes, okay? But if they have a good discussion, they talk about something meaningful beforehand, and then they're given something to do while they're viewing. It could be taking notes. It could be actually, composing a picture while they're, you're looking at the film and being inspired by it. If the viewing is active and they're doing something while they're viewing, then they're engaged in a different way. They're looking in a different way. They're looking for something in particular that's going to affect the lesson or what they're going to learn afterwards. And then after the film's over, no big surprise, it helps to have, a discussion after viewing the film. So this is what active viewing is all about. Setting your kids up with a before viewing question, having a good discussion, having them active while they watch the film, and then on the back end, wrapping up and building a bridge to what it is that you're going to do next. Okay. Oh, well, this is perfect timing. Now we're hitting a little bit of luck.
I'm sorry, I just saw the fire trucks go by. It's like the worst day ever for work.
Well, that slide just popped up right at the time that we could use it. So here's an example. We're going to be looking at a short film featuring the photographer Zanele Muholi, who's a part of our season 9 series of artists. And this is something, if I'm sharing Zanele's work in the class and we're looking at this particular episode that focuses on mobile studios, this is, maybe how I might set it up. So asking all of you, I'm going to stop talking for a few moments and ask you, how would you describe your voice? Does it have many forms? And do we control or manipulate our voices for different circumstances? If you could, those of you who are on the call right now, if you could type in some quick responses to the before viewing question, and then we'll get right into the film.
And I popped the before viewing and the while viewing questions right into the chat also, so people can reference them.
And maybe that before viewing question is just something to think about. If I'm working with students in the classroom and I ask them to describe their voice, they might have to think about it a little bit before they're going to, just simply raise their hand immediately and say that. But I would ask you to consider that as you get ready to see this particular film. Body language, mindset. Thank you, Tammy. While we're viewing the film, attitude, yeah. Katie, yeah, I suppose lots of folks can. I've heard students of mine say that. I've even heard my son say that sometimes. My physical voice is annoying. Mm-hmm. If I'm working with students in the classroom, I would, with regard to this before viewing question, I might nudge them with some different kinds of examples just to get the conversation going. I might, if I've taught with this before, give them some examples from previous classes so that they're able to kind of get a better sense of how they might express it if they're having a hard time expressing it. And one more idea, which I'm sure some of you have tried before, it doesn't always have to come out in words. Students can make a facial expression. They can, a gesture, as long as they keep it clean. A gesture in the classroom can work as a response to a question, or even a sound. So one thing that I'm trying to get better at myself is really thinking about the different kinds of ways kids can respond when we are engaged with active viewing and these kinds of questions. So why don't we get to the film and the while viewing prompt there.
Yeah, veza amehlo la kuphela. Cool. Breathe in and out. Usegiyeni vela. Yeah, ngiyakufila njengamanje. Ungathi kanje? Hey, right if coach. I'm trying to form these like mobile studios where you don't need to be fixated in one space. We live here, we pay taxes, we are citizens of this country, which is democratic, they say. Any space is a possible space. It's my own way of writing South African LGBTI history. So I don't want to be limited by anything. I don't want to be in any studio. I want to be unplugged. That's Batini, who's from Soweto, but connecting with Colin, who is in Davidson, and we're assisted by Kala. And Lerato is the project coordinator. I try to make sure that I empower the people that are featuring in the series and people who are around me. These are Faces and Faces participants. Then there's Uket with Uvilenda, who are in another series called Brave Beauties. Brave Beauties look specifically at trans women who are beauty queens. The best shot. When there are exhibitions, I take the participants with me so they'll be able to speak for themselves and get to see what happens to the photographs. How many of you have been to exhibitions, Jay? Have you been to exhibition before?
No.
I needed to give those humans a space to express, which is not what they usually do on a daily basis.
Being shown on the exhibition is a sign of showing people and letting people that we exist and we're human.
Creating the activist wall. It's a way in which we destabilize the peaceful imagery of the gallery setting.
Ukuthi ngikhulumele ngibe strong ngibe ilomuntu engoyena.
Especially gallery settings. It's white walls, beautiful images, and it seems as if there's no agency. Yes, there are these beautiful young individuals who are on the walls, but they have their own personal stories to tell. Surely the Brave Beauties are the only visual document that ever existed that has reached that far.
You can zoom in if you want to. I don't have people.
So I just wanted to give a voice to trans women, to be heard and be seen in art spaces. I needed to make sure that people see themselves as worthy humans, just like every other important women in South African history or beyond South African borders.
I love the comments folks are sharing in the chat about empowerment. You know, one of the while viewing questions asked you to think about what's important to her during the process. And, you know, again, I feel like I've said this a couple of times, but I'll say it again. You know, sometimes we front load too much, and we can often allow students to discover things for themselves that we might sometimes tell them at the beginning of a lesson or at the beginning of a unit. So there are, you know, for every artist that we've filmed, there are great text that goes along with it, writing that you can utilize using the art21.org website. And I could have read the entire introduction to Zanele's, you know, extended play there, but allowing the questions and your own note taking and some of the stuff I'm seeing in the chat window to unfold before we talk about all of the other details related to this film can make for a different kind of learning in the classroom. So I encourage you folks to sometimes front load things and sometimes, you know, start with a good question, get students thinking, whet their appetite, have them watch something. When I watched Aki Sasamoto with students earlier today, they didn't know much about Aki. You know, we were zooming in on how is Aki taking different kinds of risks as an artist. So if I'm teaching with Zanele's film, which I guess you could say I am right now, and we're finished viewing the film, obviously you'd want to get some general reactions and then talk a little bit about, you know, one of the big things that you really want them to think about. And in this case, for me, it would be, you know, how does she amplify the voices of participants through this work? And I encourage you all, if you're not already doing this in your classroom, to think about this cycle of active viewing when engaging with films, not just Art21 films, but anything that you use in the classroom that requires students to sit and watch video, for example. Okay. And thanks to, you know, all of you who are making these really beautiful comments in the chat window about Zanele's work. She certainly, Zanele as an artist is definitely interested in really beautifully having her subjects be seen in all kinds of ways and heard.
Yeah, I just want to read a couple of these because they're so, I think people are doing such a lovely job, and I want to make sure everyone hears a little bit about what you all are saying, because we can see them all, but I don't know if you can. But it looks a lot like people are responding to the empowerment, equalization, independence, making the subject stand out and become the focal point, using muted backgrounds so that they really emphasize the person and what they're trying to convey as the subject of the image. Let's see, Martha says the work is very powerful. She's making the point of humanizing transgender identities and reclaiming public spaces. Documenting their existence and giving voice to them is really important. So thank you everyone for your lovely thoughts in the chat box.
So just to wrap up, before we take some questions from some of you, if you have questions, I would reiterate that trying out, giving a test drive for big questions. We'll go revisit the term test drive in just a little while. Utilizing big questions can, you know, certainly inspire diverse answers, whether they're visual answers or verbal answers, versus students simply following instructions. Topics and themes that we're all teaching with can, I assure you, can be reframed as meaningful questions. And if it becomes part of the culture of your class, it will have an effect on the kinds of things that kids learn along the way. And engaging with the resources we have available for you, including visual experience, can, you know, certainly make a dent in expanding the content, because there's a lot of stuff there. There's just a ton of stuff there to explore. And you might say, wow, I've been doing that kind of thing for years and years this way, but, you know, if we just think about it that way, it's going to take a nice turn. So I encourage you to explore. It's free. Our 21 resources you can download for free. And Christy is going to tell you more about some Davis resources and this idea of a test drive, which I think is so cool. So here we are.
Great. So if you have any questions for Joe, please type them into the chat box, or you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many as you can. I have a question for Joe while we wait for folks to type. I know that you mentioned that you work with elementary teachers and others in your district in your position as department chair or whatever. I don't know what your title you call it in your
Right, department chair is right.
Okay, perfect. You department chair in your district. Do you find or what do you do if you have two teachers that are teaching the same course or the same grade level and maybe one is a little bit resistant to change? How do you help facilitate that in terms of using big questions?
Well, I mean, if your district supports it, I always encourage folks to see other people teaching. You know, I've also never had much luck with, you know, class starts and I raise the drawbridge and nobody is allowed to come visit my classroom unless they're doing an observation. So I hope that in time, the culture of teaching becomes even more collaborative because, you know, we get better by seeing each other do good work. So that being said, you know, if I had two teachers like that, I might ask one or both to spend a little time with the other. What do you see? What kinds of things look cool? What kinds of things are, you know, completely different than that you hadn't thought about? I've tried, and I mentioned this recently to you folks, you know, I've been trying more to not prescribe, but you know, provide invitations. You know, invitations versus prescriptions for not only the students we work with, but teachers that we work with. You know, if I invite a teacher to kind of check out another colleague and see what they're doing and just enjoy watching a teacher teach, you know, some possibility might rub off versus me saying, you know, you really got to change your, you know, your approach to working with these kids, or we really need to incorporate questions versus topics, because, you know, I'm while I might have an approach that, you know, I would love to see spread through the whole department, you can't necessarily do it all at once. And some teachers who've been working a certain way for a long time, switching things up is scary. So, you know, I would encourage them to do it a little at a time. And for that teacher that might be more resistant, I might say, you know, you may want to like give it a shot in that one unit that we can really craft a fantastic question for and see what happens. It's another long answer to a short question, I suppose, but
no, it's great. And I think the
now,
examples are really helpful. And I think it's great for people to know that you work with elementary and middle school and high school teachers. So you've seen kind of all of the different kind of dynamics that happen when you go to create curriculum. And a lot of those folks are trying to align curriculum but also retaining independence over what they like to teach and how they interpret the standards. So I think it's definitely, I mean, I think anytime we talk about curriculum, there's many layers that you have to peel back. But since you have also been teaching online, it looks like Katie here is finding that this approach works really well with virtual learning, but she's struggling because her students are very chatty and they don't want to mute. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for facilitating these kinds of conversations in a virtual space.
Well, I mean, if you're using Zoom, you know, I encourage you to keep learning about how to use the tools on Zoom because you can mute your students for different parts of the class. I'm not an expert on Google Hangouts or some of the other platforms. We've only been permitted in our district to use Zoom. And I, you know, as many of you probably do already, you know, I try to utilize chat rooms and break students up into different breakout rooms as much as I can so that I give them a chance to talk with one another, but then come back to the group and share out some of what they discussed so we can, keep moving forward in the lesson or the unit. It's, we have to make spaces for our kids to talk with one another. If we want them to make sense of some of these questions we're asking, we're going to have to give them some time to talk. And we were just discussing elementary teachers before. I had an elementary teacher that I used to work with years ago who, we spent a lot of time talking about the difference between good noise and distracting noise in the classroom. And if students are really involved and they're having discussions and they want to talk about this stuff, well, if your room is noisy for those reasons, I think it's a good thing. Yeah.
Great. We have a question here from Melissa who wants to know if you have an example of a big question from an elementary class or that would be appropriate for an elementary level.
Sure. Yeah. One of our teachers, and we have a couple of different elementary schools in our district. One of our elementary teachers that I was referencing before, he said that, his work has become more diverse using questions versus titles of projects. And he's seeing his kids rely less on following exact instructions and trying to open up. So he recently did an assignment with his students where, it used to be the landscape project, but he asked everybody, what can a landscape be? And students really thought about the different kinds of things that they can see in a landscape after they saw a variety of examples. I'm sure Frank, showed them some different examples that are more traditional, as well as perhaps some more contemporary, so they had a variety. And then they went into that particular assignment thinking, wow, anytime I've ever experienced landscape before, I thought of this particular image, or just, maybe one or two particular images. But because of the examples, students got a chance to explode the definition a little bit and then move in. And we know, once you give elementary students a little nudge, they're going to run with it. Again, just to fully answer this question, if you set up the expectation that everybody's work should be individual, and it's great that they all look different, then students are not trying to second guess the teacher. Is this right? Is this right? Is that, and that kind of stuff we want to gently, for lots of things that we do, maybe we want to move that out of the classroom and build in the expectation that we should have, very different answers to the question here. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's a great example.
And folks, if you have specific questions where my email is at the end of this session. So if you want to reach out with more specific issues, and, I can even facilitate putting you in touch with folks that do this kind of work, don't hesitate. I'm here to help in any way I can.
Great. Let's go to the next slide. Awesome. So since we have Joe with us today, I wanted to take a minute to highlight, actually, before we get to that, Joe is going to take a minute to highlight stuff about and all the great resources that we have on art21.org.
Yeah, you are more than welcome to visit art21.org. Click upper right-hand corner, or you can use this link to go straight there and visit, education at art21.org. You're welcome to apply to the Art21 Educators Program. It's a great program that we run annually with teachers from all over the country. We even have some teachers in Mexico, Canada, recently a teacher in Saudi Arabia and Australia. We're expanding as we move along in this program. We've been working with teachers for over 10 years now. And basically folks get to spend a year with Art21 and some good mentors along the way. So if you're interested in using Art21 resources and teaching with contemporary art, I encourage you to check out the Art21 Educators Program. As I said before, you can download educators guides there. They're free. The PDFs go right to your computer and you can use them for your classroom teaching. There are lesson ideas in the Learning Library at art21.org/education. So if you're looking for more specific stuff, you can go there. If you're interested in bringing Art 21 to your school, virtually or in person, when we're ready to do that again, we encourage you to reach out and send us a message. And there are some great, every week, I feel like we've got more great stuff written by fellow educators as part of art21.org's site. So I do encourage you to read some of the great stuff that's being written by our educators, especially Art 21 educators these days. And if you're not already signed up, you can also sign up for Art 21's education newsletter. My colleague Emma is awesome, and she keeps everybody updated on what's happening in education at Art 21, and I'm very thankful for all of her effort.
Yeah, they really are wonderful resources. I hope everyone has time to check them out at art21.org/education. Now let's also take a look at the visual experience. So one of the really great things I think, and we're so happy to have Joe, who wears both hats as a Davis author and an Art 21 staff member. So we have this really great resource. So the visual experience is our book for high school level. And one of the really great that there's so many really rich connections between all of the great things we've been talking about today, between big questions and active listening, that have been embedded within this text that Joe helped to author. And for me personally, as a former high school art teacher, I was so excited to see the new revision of this book. It just came out in March, so everything is super current. And it features lots and lots and lots and lots of interesting contemporary art created by artists that are diverse and inclusive. There's so many interesting ways for students to engage with the works featured in the book, including a section in the teacher's edition that provides tips for other ways to engage with art. There's also lots of support for differentiating built in, whether it's offering a variety of ways to engage or how to support student choice. But there's also tips for supporting English learners and Spanish speakers. Joe, is there anything you wanted to highlight or tell us what features of the book you're most excited about?
What I really like about this particular edition of the book is that it does give plenty of examples of what we just talked about in this webinar. There's lots of good questions that my partner Emily and I have tried to weave into the text in different ways, not just in the studio lessons, but also part of the captions of the photographs. And really, as you move through it, and if you use this book as a reference, I think you'll see there's a breadth of experience through the chapters without getting away from some of the traditional stuff that some of you might really enjoy about this particular book. So it's got some more to it that adds to some of the good things that were already going on in the visual experience previously. And I think another thing that I'm excited about really is you mentioned, Christy, the art that is included in the book, the works that reference a wide variety of contemporary artists. Kids get to see artists that are working today and really drawing on experiences that they can relate to.
Definitely. One of my favorite features of this book, in each chapter, there's a section called Evolving Ideas, which pairs a postmodern principle with a big question to help students think further about the artworks presented. For example, in chapter 3, there's one on how can art confront us with the unexpected, which features work by Morgan Roskopf to explore juxtaposition, and you do it through responding, creating, presenting, and connecting. So there's so much really cool stuff in here.
You're also reminding me about chapter 3, because chapter 3, if I remember correctly, I don't have the book in front of me right now, but if I remember correctly, it's the evolving elements and principles of design. When was the last time you heard that? Okay, so we're making a shift here, and that's one of the reasons I'm excited to work with Davis on this, because I think this book, there's a pivot to opening up some of the things that we may have previously thought were set in stone. And when we see a chapter like the evolving elements and principles versus the elements and principles, okay, I think that that says something about the book also.
Yeah, and we've got another example here. This one is one that Joe mentioned earlier. This appears in chapter 1, What is Art? Is there anything about this Art and Change studio experience you want to highlight?
We're trying to also get students to understand how artists affect change and how they might be able to get students to think about, what kinds of change do artists depict to make us think more about a particular issue. So here too, the juxtaposition of these two artworks is really important. And one of them is by Guerrilla Girls. It's sort of hidden there, but one is by Guerrilla Girls, and the other is a very famous work by Norman Rockwell.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just even flipping through the book, it's so fun to look at because there are these really great pairings, but also there's just so much really beautiful artwork featured. And if you're looking for elements and principles, or if you're looking for postmodern principles, or even for, there's a whole chapter on media art, which I personally love. It's one of my favorite chapters in the book. There's so much that rich content that will help you, especially in the teacher guide, if you are looking for help in how to engage students or how to lead a discussion. There's lots of really great support in the wraparound text that you can find in there. But if anyone would like to see the book or get a sample, you can check out even more features of the Visual Experience 4th edition by Emily Jean Hood and Joe Fusaro by visiting davisart.com/TVE, so the Visual Experience. You can also sign up for a test drive of the ebook, which provides access for 90 days at davisart.com/free resources. Please watch our social channels for announcements about our upcoming webinars. Our next session, co-sponsored with Art21, will be on October 27th. We will have Joe Fusaro back with us again, along with Ty Talbot from Seattle, Washington, and Elizabeth Deneau from Tucson, Arizona. They will be speaking about the various ways they incorporate contemporary art into high school teaching. We'll also have a panel of middle-level art teachers in December to share how they are using contemporary art to engage middle-level students. So definitely tune in for those. And I also wanted to take a quick minute to remind everyone that Davis has lots of great resources for you to access and share with the teachers you work with. If you head over to davisart.com/free resources, you'll be able to sign up for upcoming webinars, sign up for a free trial of the Davis digital platform, which includes the Visual Experience and all of our other ebooks, free access to professional development sessions. You can read School Arts Magazine online. You can view some of our on-demand video lessons. We've also put together some really great resources on equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as teaching art online. So please check those out. And also head over to Art21/educators to check out all of the wonderful resources Art21 has for you. All of the links for today and the resources that we mentioned will be available with the recording, so don't worry if you missed any of those links. We'll make sure that you get everything that you need. And I want to really thank Joe Fusaro for joining us today, and to Art21 for partnering with us. And a huge thanks to everyone who joined us today for your patience as we worked through many technical and other difficulties. We really, really appreciate you spending time with us this afternoon, and we really hope that you found the session inspiring and insightful. We're going to stop the recording at this point, but we are happy to stay on for a few minutes longer to answer any burning questions that you may have. We hope that you all stay safe and healthy, and we really hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to all of you.